This is NAB Show Live.
Good afternoon and welcome to NAB Show Live, produced by BroadcastBeat. I'm Linda Rosner, and we're here to talk about ATSC 3.0. It's a new standard for broadcasting, and I've got some very good guests here. So to my right is Thomas Bause Mason. He's Director of Standards Development for SMPTE. And in the middle there, we have Bill Hayes. He's Director of Engineering and Technology for Iowa Public Television. And on my far right is Mark Aitken of the Sinclair Broadcast Group. And I'd like each of you to first just give me a little background on yourselves and your involvement with ATSC 3.0.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I work at SMPTE, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. And I believe we are founding member of ATSC, is that correct? So we're on the board of ATSC. I'm on the board of ATSC through my position at SMPTE. And before that, I worked for a big American broadcaster in the advanced engineering team, and we were very involved in the ATSC transition, and I worked on the sideline also on ATSC 3.0.
Great. Bill?
Well, as in addition to being Director of Engineering at Iowa Public Television, I'm also the, at the time, for a while I was the president of the BTS of the IEEE, the Broadcast Technology Society. We are one of the founding members of ATSC. And so I've been involved in the standard work there since we started the original Future of Broadcast Television in 2011. And I'm also a Central Region Governor for SMPTE. So I've been involved with it since it started.
Okay, great. And Mark?
Well, I feel bad. I wasn't asked to be a founding member of ATSC, but I would have been if I could have been. I'm with the Sinclair Broadcast Group 20 years, 23 years before that. I was with Comark, and so I've had a few years in broadcasting. I'm also president of One Media. One Media is Sinclair's innovations group. And I like to tell people I've been involved in digital television since long before it was digital, starting in 1987 when the FCC started this little thing called the Advisory Committee on Advanced Television Services.
All right,
I've
now
been a troublemaker ever since.
Well, I'm glad. Now, I've sort of jumbled ATSC and what it is, so I'd like one of you to just sort of give a real short definition, even though a lot of people already know what it is, but I'd rather you articulate it.
I have a simple definition.
Okay.
My definition is 5G broadcast.
And we just had a panel on 5G.
I personally think it's 7G, but that's just me.
Really?
But that's more of a marketing statement than anything else.
Interesting.
But ATSC is the ATSC was the replacement for when we were analog television. We were NTSC. So ATSC was the standards group that designed the original DTV standard. Initially, it started out, as Mark talked about, with the. I remember the advanced compatible. Before there was digital, it was supposed to be backward compatible. So we've gone through many gyrations to get to where we are today. But ATSC was the group that was put together when we determined it was to be a digital standard, and that's the focus of the organization. It's a membership organization. Companies are members. Individuals can be members, and they work together to create standards. And ATSC 1 was the first broadcast standard, which was very U.S. centric. And now with ATSC 3, we actually pulled together a global community that worked tirelessly to develop the use case scenarios that became the basis for what we are deploying in the U.S. and the Koreans have already deployed.
I would add this flavor to it. I mean, the standards that come out of any standards organization get shaped by its membership and by most importantly, hopefully, the users. And the first digital standard of ATSC was the first digital HDTV terrestrial broadcast standard in the world. And quite frankly, it was informed and met the objectives of the majority of its membership and users at the time. This standard, I would say, is a reflection of the fact that there have been several attempts, one of them very much engaging all of the ATSC membership to bring mobility to the standard,
Yes.
with the recognition on the part of broadcasters, some earlier than others, that to remain relevant, as both a news, entertainment, industry. To be relevant, we had to be on every device, small devices, laptops, tablets, as well as that big screen in the living room and on the go everywhere.
No, absolutely. And aside from it being, bigger, better, faster, you want it to be ubiquitous. You want it to be able to apply to any media possible, any device possible that you talked about. Yeah. I know that there's ATSC 1, and there was ATSC 2, which was not adapted, and you jumped over to ATSC 3. What are the advantages? Why would a broadcaster want to use ATSC 3? Because it's not required yet. Yeah,
well, I would say there was also another major step in there, which was referred to as ATSC MH.
Okay.
ATSC Mobile Handheld. And ATSC MH was an attempt to make this first standard capable of addressing small devices. I spent 3 years of my life as the chairman of that mobile committee activity, and it was not a success. And I think for multiple reasons. There wasn't any one reason. And opinions aside, ATSC 2 was actually born out of a lot of the feature sets that we envisioned needing to be a part of this MH standard in terms of interactivity, in terms of store and forward, in terms of data casting and file delivery, and a whole host of things drove ATSC 2. But the reality is that there were also many attempts within ATSC to bring interactivity to the standard. But in the U.S. marketplace, and it is a unique marketplace, the ability to bring that additional content besides our, the video and sound, bring that content across multiple other networks with our, MVPDs, the other distributors of our product, cable, satellite, fiber, IPTV, et cetera. Those additional contents were stripped out. There was not a business arrangement in place. It would have been a competitive business against their own platforms. And so we became simply retailers of video and audio content. And so bring ATSC 3 full circle, if you can reach everybody everywhere, if you do become that ubiquitous, wireless, provider of content, then you can also provide interactivity, and you can provide all those other services. So I would say there's been a sort of a continuum of learning about the real needs of the broadcast industry. I would say that our organization stands a little differently because we entered the process believing that what we needed was a broadcast standard and not just a television standard. Yes. And the distinction in that is the broadcast standard, by the way, all wired, all IP from ground floor up, IP enabled. You can convey any kind of, it's data agnostic. It doesn't matter if it's video, audio, PDFs, maps, it doesn't matter, versus television, which is one of the services that we can offer.
Oh, that's great.
And probably the most disruptive technology we dealt with had nothing to do with our end of it. It was receivers. Receivers went from being furniture to being little tiny devices that people carried everywhere, and so the consumption. So when the ATSC 1 standard was envisioned, it was envisioned basically to a stationary receiver.
Right.
From day one, when we determined that we were going to change, because as Mark points out, the MH standard and 2 they were actually really cleverly done, but they dealt with a fundamental, basic problem is that the underlying physical architecture was designed to reach a standard receiver, and we could do all kinds of tricks, but the reality is what needed to be done was a complete ground up rebuild. And so from day one, target device was, okay, it's going to be a mobile device. It's going to be something that's handheld, whether it's a tablet. We backed away from the fact that, okay, it's not a piece of furniture anymore, and people are going to want to consume stuff on it. Sometimes it's going to be stuff that we're very familiar with, television, even video and audio. Other times it's going to be stuff that we can't quite imagine, and the device itself provides this unique opportunity that the standard TV doesn't supply, which is the ability to actually interact with it. And when you think about touchscreen, it becomes very intuitive, and now you have to start thinking about how do you create content or services that you can broadcast to a large audience that they can easily interact with. It opens up a real world of potential new services, new possibilities.
Yeah, for me, it was always an eye-opener that I think the first ATSC standard came out in 1995, and Wi-Fi, the first Wi-Fi standard came out in 1997. So ATSC 1 was really conceived before all these new devices came out, before the new technologies, networking technologies came out. And so ATSC 3.0 is just basically adopting over-the-air broadcast to these new market circumstances, right? And so I think the one thing which I would add as a ATSC 3.0 capability is this capability of choosing between the robustness of your transmission versus how much bandwidth I have available, so I can really tailor my broadcast to my market requirements and the area I want to cover or the devices I want to address, right? And I think that's probably the biggest challenge for ATSC 3.0 now is after the technology is all done and set in stone, what are the business models we can apply to ATSC 3.0 and how can we market this?
Mark, you want to
I was going to say that none of those are mutually exclusive, because you can address those different classes of devices with different services simultaneously. You can have an ultra rugged, deep penetrating signal on one hand, or you can have a very high capacity, less robust signal to carry different kinds of content to fixed devices. So it's not an either or. There's literally a whole sliding scale, and I think as importantly, it's a standard that was built to be able to evolve, because the reason for MH being built on the last standard was a fear of having to break the chain, so to speak, and have a non-backwards compatible approach. So the approach taken was, we'll build something that's compatible. It doesn't disrupt the existing, sets and architecture, and provide a different service at the same time. But at the end of the day, for lots of reasons, both technical and business, it wasn't a success. And there was a realization that if we were going to sort of like hit the wall and have to start all over again, we would do it in the context of having evolvability built in so that we didn't have to hit that wall again.
And that was done with ATSC 1.0.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm just wondering about, Tom, you wanted to make sure that we talked about the standards that SMPTE was implementing or wants to implement with ATSC 3.0. What's all that about?
Yeah, well, SMPTE, I think, is a bit upstream from ATSC 3.0. So the SMPTE standards are really about professional media and what's happening in the facility.
Yeah.
But if we talk about the flexibility of ATS 3.0, There obviously, if you're trying to get your content to the edge and to a transmitter, you also have to provide it with configuration data. And I think there are, at least at the moment, just some discussions going on how SMPTE standards can help with that. We have the broadcast exchange format, which is a way how systems in broadcasting can communicate with each other, and how you can relate these configuration data to a transmitter in a broadcast chain. So that would be one opportunity. What we haven't really talked about is the next generation image and audio formats. So I guess that's another aspect of ATSC 3.0. Implementing a new compression algorithm, HEVC, H.265, and to make the compression more efficient and get more into your channel than you could before with just MPEG-2 transport stream. So, and SMPTE, I think, can help there with, for example, HDR dynamic metadata, right? So ATSC 3.0 is enabled to do HDR. So at some point, as this standard evolves, there's going to be dynamic HDR metadata, and so SMPTE can provide that standard to enable this transport of metadata.
The lines are so blurred now between, in the old days it used to be, you had very specific not barriers, but divisions between what was the transmission, what was content creation, what was distribution. And now you have to think of these things so holistically, because you can implement something upstream and break things downstream because of the nature of how digital works. So, I'm at the end of this, at the end of the chain. Mark's organization also. We're sort of the content providers, and we're the people who put content out there. And for us, it comes down to, we have to participate in all of these areas to make sure that what the SMPTE group is doing makes sense in the environment that we're working, and that we can pass it through, and that when it reaches the receive device knows what to do with it, so the consumer actually can consume the content, whether it's the improvements we make, or to the quality of the image or the audio, or the interactivity we add onto it. All of this stuff has to work seamlessly together, and it's a very complex and dynamic environment. So it's a real challenge. It takes, it's not for the faint of heart to get involved in this, because you spend hours and hours and hours with very smart people talking about things that to the outside world look meaningless, but you know that if it's not done right, the screen at the end user and that's who we're trying to reach. The end of the chain is the people we're trying to serve, and if the screen is blank or the service they go to is not there, we have failed. And so that's why it takes a group of very dedicated people focused on making sure that what we're doing is holistically, completely transparent. We want to be as invisible as we can between the creator and the receiver.
Yeah. And I was thinking about the very first question you asked, and so there's another answer. You asked, can you briefly describe ATSC 3? So to continue from what Bill's thoughts were, OTT over the air.
Yeah.
Right? So suddenly, the set of standards that we're reliant on are extremely varied, because there is the content creation, but there is the internet. And so suddenly when your bits flow across in exactly the same way, but wirelessly, the same way, in the same form as the internet. One of the very important efforts was to build around standards, but some of those standards are web standards, IETF, W3C, others. So suddenly, the evolvability becomes more important as well, because standards themselves change. The underlying standards can change. And so you can envision this cycle where in fact there will be new capabilities that are possible. We don't want to disrupt the folks who have already bought a set with a certain set of features and capabilities. Those are fine. Those things don't get disrupted. You're able to layer on new capabilities. So the next generation of devices that evolve along with the standard, in fact, have those new capabilities. And so you have this continuous evolution as opposed to, shoot, I'd love to do this, but I can't. A good one example is what has happened with the adoption of smart TVs. All right, smart TVs support many different codecs, and the way that the actual screen, if you will, is plumbed to the heart of the system is different than a TV set that was simply a television receiver. And so suddenly what it means there is, and we've done work and it's getting more and more in the favor of broadcasters, but we operate with MPEG-2 as a part of the standard. That is the standard. You've had advancements in codecs. You had MPEG-4, AVC. You have HEVC, which is new. But AVC is wide, and AAC audio. They're widely used on the internet. And so smart TVs suddenly have adopted the ability to use all these codecs. And so there's a larger and larger body of existing television sets that in fact support these new features. So it's been very important to be conscious of the fact that that standards and systems evolve and broadcasters follow that as opposed to get left in the backwoods.
I'm afraid we just have a few minutes, but I know you wanted to reply.
No, I was.
You're good. Okay, so
Yeah.
here's a question.
I thought we had an hour and a half.
We should. Here's just one last question I have is, what's the broadcaster's response been, the various broadcasters' response been to ATSC 3.0 as far as adapting it, as far as embracing it? Because as I say, it's not a requirement, so the stations can take it or not, right?
Yeah, I think over the last a year or so, I observed a swing in mood. I mean, there were some concerns that maybe the adoption of ATSC 3.0 is not happening, but I think just in the last few months, it sounded all very much more optimistic. There was commitment, I believe, from larger networks and a lot of smaller networks to do ATSC 3.0. I think now we're going to see by the end of the year, I guess, TV sets coming out with ATSC 3.0 receiver.
Great.
So I think there's now with a rollout of equipment, you're going to see more adoption, and I believe it was somebody said up to 50 broadcasters who committed to it.
That's fantastic.
And, so I think I'm fairly optimistic about the adoption.
Yeah, certainly Mark's group has been at the head of this, as well as the Pearl group, with pulling markets together. The thing that is so unique about this transition is that in order for it to be successful, and because it is voluntary, markets themselves have to work together, and it's kind of interesting because in TV within the TV markets, the TV stations themselves are pretty competitive. So this is sort of, it's not ingrained in their DNA to work together as teams. It's always been that way within engineering. The engineers, we've all spent an overnight someplace and called the competitor, and their engineers gladly come over and helped us out. But this means that from top to bottom, stations that compete with each other for the viewers in that market have to work together, because it's the only way it makes sense. And thanks to Spectrum Co. and Sinclair's dedication, and the dedication of certainly the Pearl Group and some visionary stations, you're seeing stations, groups of stations embrace it. You're also seeing, there's others that are they're kind of terrified of it because it's a lot. It's a huge investment, and you don't know if the audience is going to follow you.
I'm afraid I have to stop. I'm getting
Well,
the signal.
there's one more unique thing you have to.
All right. Hopefully they won't cut us off.
This transformation of markets to this wireless IP standard is happening without the allocation of additional spectrum. We've had massive amounts of spectrum taken away from us, and in spite of that, you've got literally, I think the last count, 157 stations will be involved in one way or another with the first wave of transforming to ATSC 3.
That's exciting.
That's without any new spectrum.
Okay, and did you want to add anything more to this, Thomas?
No, I wanted to mention too that the repack and the spectrum auction kind of forced a cooperation between station doing channel sharing. See how they can deliver to a market in a unified fashion. Right?
Well, I got to tell you, I love my smart TV, so I can't wait for ATSC 3.0. I thank you all very much. It was really wonderful. And I want to wish everybody a good afternoon. And this is Linda Rosner signing off from NAB Show Live, produced by Broadcast Beat. Have a good afternoon.
Ooh.